Would you share a water bottle with a stranger on the train? What about with your best friend, someone who could also get you sick? Would you touch your romantic partner's dirty socks? Or what about a stranger's? Check out my lecture, and I'll tell you all about why our minds make us more comfortable with some disease risks than with others.
How does love make you sick? This is the University of the Netherlands.
I have a friend, bit of a germaphobe. He has a real problem going to a restroom if it's not too clean. He's always got a bottle of hand sanitizer with him, just in case. Now, this might sound familiar to you. You probably have a friend like this, or maybe you're someone like this yourself. Now, it's an interesting question why some people are more versus less germophobic. But that's a question for another day. Today, I'd like us to think about something else that's interesting about my friend and about germophobic friends of yours. This friend, he has no problem changing his own baby's dirty diaper, sharing a glass of water with his wife, or shaking my hand. Why is that? These types of acts seem just as likely to transmit disease as other things that he's really uncomfortable with. What is it about love and close relationships that seems to make people more comfortable taking disease risks? To answer this question, let's think about pathogens, the bacteria, viruses, and other microorganisms that cause infectious disease. Now, pathogens are vanishingly small. Take the coronavirus that causes COVID-19 as an example. It's only about 100 nanometers wide, meaning you could fit 1,000 of them on the head of a pin. Effectively, they're invisible to the naked eye. So how do these pathogens get to us if they're so small? They can't chase after us like lions or tigers or bears, larger predators that try to devour us. Well, they spread via the air that we breathe, surfaces we touch, contact with other people, and food and beverages. Take eating and drinking as an example. It allows pathogens a route through our mouths into our bodies, effectively bypassing the skin, which forms a protective barrier against pathogens. And if someone who has a pathogen coughs or sneezes and touches a surface, and we touch that surface and then touch our faces, our mouth, our eyes, we could become infected. Now, despite their small size, pathogens can cause tremendous damage to us, slowing us down for days, causing long-term disability, or even killing us. And these types of consequences, they've been on our mind a lot in recent years with outbreaks of Ebola, COVID-19, and influenza. But the consequences of pathogens are by no means unique to our modern world. Indeed, pathogens have wreaked havoc on humans for the several 100,000 years we've been on planet Earth. Now, considering what a big problem pathogens are, it's incredible that no person ever even saw a bacterial cell until Antony van Leeuwenhoek first peered into the world of microbes in the 17th century after over 99% of our species' history on Earth had already passed. And no one even saw a virus until the 20th century. So, pathogens, we've mostly been ignorant of their existence, and they're too small for us to see with our naked eyes. Does that mean that we're completely powerless to avoid them? Well, not necessarily. Over our evolutionary history, pathogens have been more likely to be in some places than others, more likely to be on bodily waste than on rocks, in spoiled foods than fresh ones, and emitted from coughing people than non-coughing people. And our evolution has potentially been able to shape our senses of vision, hearing, taste, smell, and touch to be sensitive to these types of locations. We feel disgust when we smell, taste, or touch them. Now, this disgust, it's a clever tool. When we feel it, we feel like avoiding whatever made us feel this disgust. But it's not any kind of avoidance. It's not the kind of avoidance that corresponds with fear, the sprinting that we might do if a snake lunges at us or if a person is chasing us. It's a type of avoidance that's specifically tailored for microorganisms that rely on contact to infect us. But this disgust, it doesn't only make us want to move away from potential pathogen sources. It also corresponds with specific muscle movements in the face, Muscle movements that narrow our eyes, making them less exposed to pathogens that could infect us, that scrunch up our nose, making less air flow into our lungs, and that tighten the muscles around our mouths, making it less likely that things get into our mouths, and if something disgusting is in our mouth, we spit it out immediately. Altogether, our sensory systems and our emotions, they form a kind of behavioral immune system that protects us from infectious disease. And this behavioral immune system, it really shapes the way we see the world and critically how we see other people. Some of the most important infectious diseases in history, they are transmitted by other people. Things like smallpox, measles, mumps, and the plague. And these diseases, they cause symptoms in their hosts, people who can make us sick. And when we detect those symptoms, we feel like avoiding those people, not having contact with them, in a way that protects us from getting sick. But this behavioral immune system, it's not perfect, just like our actual immune systems aren't. A key problem for the behavioral immune system is the fact that pathogens sometimes produce no symptoms in those who are contagious, people who can still make us sick through something called asymptomatic transmission. Take Mary Mallon, or Typhoid Mary, as an example. Mary emigrated to the US from Ireland in the early 20th century. She worked in New York City as a cook, bouncing from job to job, working for different families. Now, investigators found an outbreak of typhoid fever in New York City, and they traced that outbreak to the specific families that Mary was working as a cook for, finding that Mary, even though she never was experiencing symptoms of the disease, was asymptomatically transmitting typhoid to her employers. Now, this story has a sad ending. Mary had to be quarantined for several years, and even after that, they found she was still asymptomatically transmitting the illness, and she had to be quarantined for the rest of her life. Now, this type of asymptomatic transmission, it's common across pathogens. Indeed, with COVID-19 that's currently ravaging the world. And scientists have tried to better understand it using studies in which they intentionally infect volunteers with pathogens and monitor the course of infection. A summary of 56 studies in which scientists infected people with influenza show that 90% of infected people eventually shed viral particles, meaning they could pass on the disease to others. However, only 70% of people developed any signs of illness, meaning 20% of people with influenza, well, they were shedding viral particles, but no one could tell that they were sick. So how does the behavioral immune system navigate this type of problem? Not only a pathogen that's practically invisible, but one that is transmitted without giving any hints of its presence. Well, we could think of 3 ways that the behavioral immune system could deal with this type of problem. First, it could make us never feel comfortable with any contact with other people or contact with things that others have touched. Now, this would be really good for preventing infectious disease, but it would have tremendous negative consequences for our valued relationships, for cooperating with friends and coworkers and family, and for caring for our infants. Effectively, people with this psychology just wouldn't survive very long. Now, second, we could never sacrifice any of the benefits of our relationships and not invest at all in pathogen avoidance. We could feel comfortable touching or licking anyone or anything that someone has touched. Now again, this strategy wouldn't sacrifice any benefits of relationships, but it would leave us absolutely vulnerable to pathogens. It would be like people who don't experience a sense of pain, who don't move their hands from a burning surface, or not run if they have a sprained ankle or a broken leg. Now third, we could have a psychology that selectively opens us up to pathogen risks with different people. Now this might make some intuitive sense. You're probably more comfortable sharing a water bottle with your best friend than with a stranger on a bus. And you're probably more comfortable touching your sibling's dirty laundry than a stranger's dirty laundry. But what's the difference between a stranger and your romantic partner or a stranger and your sibling? Are strangers actually more likely to carry infectious diseases, to asymptomatically transmit something to you? Well, we actually think that the behavioral immune system is considering how valuable a specific person is to us and shaping how comfortable we are with taking a risk to get infected. Now, we tested this idea in a few experiments. in which our participants, they either picture their romantic partner, their closest friend, an acquaintance, or someone they know but they really dislike. And they answered several questions about how comfortable they were with acts that present some infection risk. Things like drinking from the same water bottle, sharing a hairbrush, or touching the other person's socks after they exercised. And we found that, indeed, people are much more comfortable with these potentially infectious acts when the other person is more valued, more comfortable with these acts with a romantic partner than with a closest friend, with a closest friend than with an acquaintance, and with an acquaintance than with someone they dislike. Now, you might wonder, are these patterns really explained by differences in relationship value across these targets? Or is it something else? Maybe we form relationships with people who are less likely to get sick. Or maybe we get used to the germs that our close relationships have. Well, we tested these ideas in a few ways. First, we looked at how valuable our participants found this other person using a financial trade-off task, in which they were asked how much money they would sacrifice so the other person could receive some money. And what we found is that people were more comfortable with infection risks the more money they were willing to sacrifice for the benefit of the other person, even within these 4 relationship categories. Now, second, we conducted another study in which we showed people pictures of strangers that we either described as honest and kind or dishonest and unkind. That is, strangers who are more likely to be valuable relationship partners or relationship partners that might cheat and exploit them. And here again, we found that people were much more comfortable with these types of infection risks with kind and honest strangers who could be more valuable relationship partners than dishonest and unkind strangers. So what does all this mean? And what lessons can we take from these findings? Well, we know that infectious diseases spread fastest within households and among close friends. And a lot of that is probably attributed to these people just being physically closer to each other. But it also might be attributable to our behavioral immune systems relaxing among people whom we value more as relationship partners. Now, what this tells us is we especially need to be careful with acts that we feel comfortable with, but that could transmit infectious disease, especially around flu season or during pandemics like COVID-19. Now, doing so might be tricky. If you decline to hug someone, shake their hands, kiss them on the cheek, or share a glass, they might interpret that as you thinking they're infectious or not a very valued relationship partner. So what we might need to try to do is shift our norms so that things like handshakes and kisses and sharing glasses, they're not as meaningful, and therefore we can do them less to spread less disease. Now, we've learned today that pathogens are tiny and that most people in the history of our species didn't even know they exist. Nonetheless, they've had tremendous consequences on the evolution of our species, the way that our sensory systems and emotions work, and our history. And these consequences are often non-intuitive. Indeed, the next time you see your germaphobic friend be really bothered by some disease risks, but fully embrace others, just keep in mind that his behavioral immune system is kind of relaxing that motivation to avoid disease around his valued relationship partners. Now, to answer the question that we started with, is love more likely to make us sick? Well, yes. Our minds are treating love and close relationships of worth the risk of infection. Thank you very much for listening to this lecture.